Hey everybody, this is Craig Garber. Welcome to Everyone Loves Guitar. A couple of quick announcements. Number one, I am like 3/4 of the way through the flu. I apologize. My head is stuffed up and my voice sounds awful. And as my wife said, video is not my friend today, so give me a pass for the next few days. That being said, man, I've got just such a wonderful guest. This guy is we're with Chris Bruce. He is a quintessential, really successful, lifelong sideman and artist himself. I can't wait to talk to Chris. He's got a really interesting background and he's involved in everything, man. Quick announcement. I want to give a shout out and a thanks to my brother from another mother, Reggie Hamilton, for connecting us, and Jeff Parker as well. Thank you both, guys. I really appreciate it. Also, make sure you go to everyonelovesguitar.com/subscribe, and you can subscribe to the show both on YouTube, the videos, and the audio podcast. All right, let's talk about my man, Chris Bruce. Chris is equally adept at guitar and bass, and I'm sure you probably play other things besides guitar and bass, right?
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah, he's also like, this guy could play anything that's not nailed down is my suspicion, and he's incredibly humble. Chris is born in Chicago to a music-loving family who also had direct connections to very important figures in music. Now check this out. His grandparents owned an after-hours tavern on the south side of Chicago called Herb's Lounge, which was open from the early 40s to the mid 80s, which is just amazing. That in and of itself. Their place was basically an after hours club for people like Louis Armstrong, Billie Holiday, Sarah Vaughan, Count Basie, and Sam Cooke. He remembers his mother's friends, Minnie Riperton and Curtis Mayfield. That's like hysterical just when I was reading that. Like, Chris Curtis is coming over tonight. I mean, how nutty is that? Hanging out in a good way. Hanging out at his house later when he was living with his mom in L.A. during the early to mid 70s. Members from Earth, Wind and Fire and War would stop by frequently. Most significantly was Gary Shider. He was a guitar player with P-Funk, Diaper Man, and Star Child. That was his character. And Glenn Goins, another great guitar player from Funkadelic. He passed really young, I think, didn't he?
Yeah, he was 23 or 24.
Yeah. Tragic. From Funkadelic, they would hang out. First recording session that Chris attended was in 1976 at Hollywood Sound for the Parliament album, The Clones of Dr. Funkenstein, at which time he met George Clinton and Bernie Worrell. He was just started playing bass at the time. His older brother was already an established bass player, and he picked up his brother's bass. Chris moved back to Chicago soon after that, asked for a bass for his 10th birthday, and that was it. Began playing guitar as well at age 12. He also saw a number of life-changing concerts as a kid, and we'll ask him about those in a bit. At 14, he started getting unpaid yet invaluable studio experience in Chicago at Streeterville Studios, and more importantly at, if I mess this up, correct me, Chris, Jerem Studios?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Jerem Studios, which temporarily replaced Chess Studios at the historic 2120 South Michigan Avenue location for a short period of time. He also got invaluable schooling working at independent record stores in Chicago until an opportunity came up to audition for, check this out, Wendy and Lisa from Princeton Revolution in LA in '89. Wendy and Lisa was a pivotal turning point for him for all the experience he got, as well it was ground zero for making a living as a full-time musician. It was also a bridge to a number of other important artist relationships such as Seal, Doyle Bramhall II, and most importantly, Meshell Ndegeocello, who he's been with for, how long, Chris?
About 12 years now, something like that.
12 years, and he's very involved with her writing, production, music, everything, and we'll talk about that. He's worked with legendary producers Trevor Horn, Craig Street, and Joe Henry, as well as others. He's done studio dates with, this is like a who's who of studio musicians, Jim Keltner, Pino Palladino, Greg Leisz, Greg Leisz, right?
Leisz, yeah.
Greg Leisz, Jay Bellerose, who's been mentioned by probably 40 artists on this show.
I'm sure.
Yeah. Benmont Tench, D'Anthony Parks, Abe Laboriel Jr., Alan Toussaint, Billy Preston, and loads of others. He's recorded with a variety of artists over the years, including Chris Connelly, who's formerly of Ministry and the Revolting Cocks, and the Waterboys to Solomon Burke, MC Search. That's the guy from Third Base, right?
Exactly, yeah.
That's so cool. I want to ask you about those guys. Were pretty interesting, man. They really were.
He was great.
Yeah, I would imagine. Ted Hawkins, which is another like one of these guys discovered later and just kind of had like a boatload of past issues, I guess, that maybe probably didn't allow him to the fruition of what he should have been. George Clinton, Alanis Morissette, Bob Dylan, John Doe, Amy Mann, Jeff Beck, Liz Wright, who he's done a lot of work with, and he's currently producing a record for her. My Brightest Diamond, Paula Cole, and Sheryl Crow, as well as others. Chris, man, it's such a pleasure and an honor to talk with you, man.
Okay, and also, I've never done anything with Dylan, so I don't know where that came from.
I don't either.
I
don't know. Maybe I was reading something else. Sorry, I am coming over the flu. Sometimes, you know what happened? One time, this guy, an English, it was, I think, Kevin, I forgot who it was. No, it was a guy who's from the punk rock movement, and he didn't give me a bio. And he goes, I have something over here. It was somebody wrote something online. It said he worked with the Beatles. And I put it down, and he goes, Craig, I never worked with the Beatles. I said, hey, man, it said it on your bio, man. You had it. But anyway, I'm sorry. I was probably reading something, man. Anyway, thank you so much for coming on the show, man.
Yeah, thank you.
I really appreciate it. All right, so let's start at the beginning. Tell me about the After Hours Club that your grandparents had. How did they get into that business, and how the hell 40 years, man? That's, like an eternity in that world.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. Since my father passed not too long ago in 2016.
Oh, man, I'm sorry.
And in his
real sorry.
And I found a treasure trove of photos, and I knew that the club existed when he was a little boy, when he was really young, but I always thought that was a place that Herb, the name Herb, that's my grandfather, and I thought that the place was run by both him and my grandmother from the very beginning. But through these photos, I realized Herb had actually opened it before he was with my grandmother. And I think it was at maybe one other location before it ended up on 55th, which is the one that became famous, or that I grew up with. So, and my dad was born in 44, so so I know he started it in the early 40s. And my grandfather, I don't have all the exact information, but I know that he used to work for Capone. Like, he was a runner in Chicago for Capone, as was Louis Armstrong. That's how they knew each other. And and I think Capone was instrumental in him starting his own business, and people also not messing with him and letting him just do his thing, so like, hey man, I need a place to funnel these dollars. I'll invest them in your club. You run it and manage it, kind of thing. Maybe he didn't invest any money. He just kind of like, it's more like he gave it its blessing, because everything was so corrupt. Everyone was messing with everybody, the whole gang was saying all that stuff. So it was kind of like, this place is okay, believe me. And I think, and also him, Louis Armstrong and so forth, that was kind of an entryway into the whole kind of celebrity scene that started happening. So so that was the place that, when all these people would be on tour, Duke Ellington, whoever, when they wanted to go hang after the shows, that's where they would go. And also in those days, that was when it opened. That was before there were jukeboxes, and they used to keep upright pianos in the club, which both of those ended up at my grandmother's house, and unfortunately were both destroyed in a flood in the basement. But they used to keep them there because the singers back then would always travel with their accompanist. So like, if Billie Holiday or Sarah Vaughan was there, they want to get them to do a tune, the piano's there to get up and sing right there in the spot,
Did they have live music there as well?
That was the extent of it. They wouldn't have full bands, but they'd have this piano, and the singers would get up and play with someone, and maybe they're playing records and things like that until jukebox is kicked in later on and so forth. But and it just, they really managed to survive over the years, because it also just became a real neighborhood spot, as well. So it's interesting, especially looking through these photos, because you just see all the decades, even just from the fashion and the kinds of people that were hanging out. And, I started hanging out there like in the daytime. I was like maybe 5 years old. I'd go down in the daytime with my grandfather. He worked the day shift. My grandmother would take the night shift. Funny enough.
Your grandmother must have been a pretty tough woman working bar night shift, man. You can't. Yeah.
No,
you can't be like really easygoing and accommodating in that situation.
No. And she was a really incredible person. And she was half German, and she's one of those people that was just so evolved, just naturally. I can't really explain it, but she just was a very forward-thinking person from as far as that's just how I knew her.
That's awesome.
Very differently about things.
Give me one example.
One thing that always sticks out of my mind, for instance, is I remember after I got out of high school, or I was looking towards graduating from high school, and I've rarely got into fights with my father, for instance, but one big fight I got into with him was that I didn't want to go to college. As soon as I finished high school, I wanted to get out and start trying to work, and he really didn't agree with that. And one of the first things I did was that was when I went back to LA, and I knew a couple of guys that owned a studio in Hollywood, and I slept in the office of the studio, and I'd walk down the street to the AMPM and use the restroom there to wash up, and it was just crazy. But I did that for like a summer or something, and then it just went nowhere. And I went back and tried going back to school. I went to the American Academy of Art because my father was a illustrator, and I was going to follow in his footsteps at one point. So I thought,
that's really weird that he was an illustrator, yet he, a creative himself, yet he was so hell bent on you going to college. That's not common. He's a very pragmatic kind of person. And also, I think the other thing is, that's a really strong issue, particularly within African-American families in that time too. It's like, to even have that option to go to college is such a great thing. So it's sort of like, why wouldn't you do that when like people have fought for this, blah, blah, so it's, it's magnified in a different kind of way. Now I get it. I totally get it. Yeah.
Yeah. So he was pretty frustrated by that. And so I tried going back to school, and it just failed. I hated it. I was like, I do not want to be here. And I was taking night courses. I walked out of class one night, and I knew I wasn't going back. And it was maybe midnight or something. And I walked to a record store called Peaches Records, where I knew a friend of mine worked there.
Yeah, I remember Peaches.
Yeah. And I went there, and I told my buddy, I said, look, I just walked out of school. I am not going back. I need to have a job. Like, I need to have something lined up to be like, but I'm doing this, or I have this in my pocket, So that was the whole start of a stint working in record stores for a while.
So how did your grandmother?
So I remember the night. So I went home after that, and she had just come in from work herself, actually, and I told her what was happening, and I was really upset. She could see how upset I was, and she just said to me, she says, she's basically like, I'll talk to your father, don't worry about it. And she says, you know what, you're like me, we don't do things the same way. You got to do. She's really that, like, you really need to do what feels right. That that's how you're going to really succeed, or grows by doing something that you love. If you see a path to that, then that's what you need to follow. So she was really in support of that.
That is very forward thinking. And I hate to say this, but especially for a woman at that time, I mean, to be strong enough to even, quote, have the balls to think that way, because women were not supposed to think that way.
Exactly.
Wow. That's awesome that you had her.
Yeah.
That's really cool. Yeah. Very cool. Right on, man. So, and your dad is probably sitting there thinking, man, my son is a bright guy and he's working at Peaches. It's probably killing him.
It was funny because I think the first thing I had to do is I got his money back. from the school.
Right.
So I was able to get them a check. Here's the check.
Yeah, that probably.
Because I didn't go there long enough. They were like, fine, we'll just refund you. And I have a job. And, he just left it going. It's like, all right, he was sort of like, well, let's see where this goes.
Good. So it opened up after that. Yeah. I mean,
we're great friends, over the years, me and my dad. Yeah.
That's very cool. As a dad myself, that is always what happens, because your kids always, I have 3, they always do things that you're like, man, this is just a really bad decision.
Right.
And then once they're 18, especially like the first one, not so much, but like by the time the second one comes, you're just like, no, I'm done at 18. Right. You realize you accept it. And it always works out.
Yeah.
And it's none of my business when it comes down to it. Outside of, I'm concerned for your health and safety.
Sure. Yeah.
But it's not my business. And you learn that after the first one, you learn it pretty quick. You know? So I'm glad obviously it worked out. So
yeah.
Thank you, man. Thanks for sharing that story.
Yeah.
Tell me maybe a few things that you saw or overheard back from when you were a little kid hanging out at Herb's, from observing people, celebrities, good or bad, like stuff that maybe,
for me, well, by the time I was there, like I was too young to have seen like the real, people like, Sam Cooke and so forth. That scene had already kind of gone. So, so by the time I was there, that wasn't really happening, even though I'd hear people telling stories. My grandmother would, it would be funny to hear her telling stories about Billie Holiday nodding out at the bar things like, but she's saying it in kind of a funny way. It's not this whole tragic thing. She's like, yeah, she'd be up there nodding, And,
that is funny, man. Yeah.
Or, she'd see Ella Fitzgerald on TV and joke about her putting on weight and things like, hear her
That's
talk
so
about
funny.
These giants in this casual way, which is so like, kind of crazy.
Out of context. Yeah, man.
Yeah. But you would go, but even in the 70s going in there, because they definitely still had their regulars and then, their neighborhood clientele and so forth, but it could be sort of a time warp in a way, because people talk differently. The vernacular was different to people from certain eras, but then like I said, then they had the jukebox and in there, so that was kind of important for me, because a lot of things I've heard for the first time just hanging out at the bar. Like I remember hearing "Thank You for Letting Me Be Myself" Sly and Family Stones on a jukebox at the bar, and I would just play it over and over. So I'd hear stuff like that. And, they had a lot of music in there that as a kid, I feel like that's grown-up music, but things like Bobby Womack and Al Green and Johnny Taylor, and there was a lot of jazz stuff. So I heard, that was my first time hearing a lot of that kind of stuff, Esther Phillips and things like that.
That's really, man. I never thought about this question, but you mentioned Sly Stone, "Thank You for Letting Me Be Myself."
Yeah.
Is that a bass, or is that a keyboard playing that classic?
That's a bass.
Who is that?
That's Larry Graham.
Man, that's got to be one of the most classic bass lines in the history of music.
Yeah, well, I think that's the first bass track that's, like thumping and slapping. That's the first one,
Wow, that is such a, yeah. Man, I even play that on guitar sometimes, just when I'm warming up. It's hard not to play when you just happen to hit a random,
And the guitar tracks on that are amazing. I think they get overlooked by the bass in a way, because to me, the guitar interplay on that stuff is just as incredible as, everyone goes on about the guitar interplay within the Stones, which I love.
Yeah.
That guitar playing is exactly just as spellbinding as anything the Stones have done.
Man, and it's hard to play those rhythm tracks because it's the same stuff over and over. It's not easy to do the same pattern 50, 60, 100 times in a song, man. And with the wah on that and everything, it is very intricate. Yeah, I agree with you, man.
It's like
a lot of that funk stuff is like that, where it's very intricate and it's not complicated as a line, but it's not easy to play. It's very, you got to be on top of it, man.
Yeah, it's a lot more conceptual, I think, than people realize. I think a lot of, to me, funk guitar playing, rhythm playing, the nuance, I feel like is escaped on a lot of people, like, because to me, like, it's sort of got rhythm guitar playing sort of got defined by Nile Rodgers. I feel like later on, like once he started, that was kind of everyone's kind of go-to for rhythm guitar playing, which I think Nile Rodgers is phenomenal. He's one of the greatest, but it's just a different thing. The thing that was going on with like James Brown and Sly Stone and P-Funk were these really specific guitar parts that were weaving in and out of each other. That's a totally different thing than the more dense kind of rhythm things that are going across, And even Nile's parts are very specific when you really get into them,
It's very hard, man. Mm-hmm. Did you see there's a documentary, and I don't want to get into about George Clinton.
Mm-hmm.
Did you see that? It's really not about, I'm just going to tell you the premise of the documentary. I'm not taking sides. The premise of the documentary is that George had all these guys over the years, and he did not financially do the right thing with them.
Oh, I think I know you're talking about it. I think I've seen that one. Yeah. There's things I've heard over the years many times. I think also that documentary was edited in a way to make it look worse than it was.
Right.
I definitely, I do remember things like, when they were on tour, because I used to see them all the time when I was a kid.
Sure.
And I remember George would usually be at a different hotel, which is fancier, and the rest of the band is at the other hotel. So, and that's so common in the business anyway.
Back then, especially.
Yeah. And also, I just feel like that period, especially in the 70s, was such testing ground in terms of how to be a rock star, and to deal with that whole spectacle and excess and so forth, like the Stones and things like that. Like that was the first time people were doing that. David Bowie, where there was these huge tours, a huge production, and you hear that across the board, not even just George Clinton. You hear with David Bowie too. People were getting ripped off, no one's getting paid because all the money's going in production or whatever, or someone's lifestyle. Right. Like everyone was learning how to manage all of that at the time, and so I just think by nature of that there's going to be some casualties,
Yes.
And the thing with the P-Funk world to me is, to me, like I would see it, it's like a culture in itself, like it's a lifestyle.
Yeah, it is. That's great. Yeah.
And so when you get into that scene, you kind of have to, that's the thing you kind of have to accept. Like, I'm choosing to be a part of this life. It's not necessarily like I'm going to do this and I'm going to get, such and such, unless you're really business minded not to do that, it's just difficult. There were only a couple of people like Glenn Goins who passed at 24. He was one of the few people, like had he lived, he would be like a producer or some definitely an artist, but also a producer. Like he was talking with Clive Davis back then. Wow. Clive Davis loved him. He saw that in him back then. He just died before he got to do what he wanted to do. But he was aware of, like, he had already played with Bobby Womack before and Johnny Taylor before he was with George. So he already had an idea about some business things and publishing things and rights and all that stuff. So he was like, wait a minute, I can't do that within this scene. That's why he left.
Wow. Okay. So you know what, man? So I think that's very reasonable what you said. You got to take some of that ownership yourself, because they joined that. There's a really good point. They joined this gang, knowing the rules of the gang.
Right.
Yeah. And then later on, they're not happy with it. Well, we all make decisions knowing things, and then we're not happy with it. That's just theirs in this particular case. Yeah, man, I think that's a very mature.
Because at the end of the day, George Clinton is a genius.
Yeah, for sure.
He provided a platform for a lot of people to do a lot of things,
Yeah.
But it's the kind of situation where if you want to excel in a certain way, you just have to be savvy enough to find a way to do it yourself in a healthy way.
Yeah, man. I'm right. I think personal accountability is like one of the most important things as a human being that anybody needs in any career to be successful, man. If you're not pointing the finger at you first, it's not going to happen. So I think there's a huge I think everything you're saying is 100% valid. I mean, you got to think, why did he only take 17-year-old kids on? You know,
Right.
why didn't he bring on like seasoned people? Well, because they're not going to, they know the deal.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
It's that, and also, you know, George is always, he's another one that's always really looking ahead musically, and so like he really wanted to be at the ahead of the game with what was happening musically. So
yeah,
you know, if you felt like the people that, you know, I don't think it necessarily was an age thing, but if he just sees like the ideas are stagnant, he's like, well, I'm going to go over here.
Yeah.
You know? So like he, you know, and they're also so enthused. You know, I mean, you know, you get kids. Yeah, it's like you said, a gang. It's like they're just, yeah, we're down.
Yeah, absolutely.
Where do we go? You know, you're just excited to live that life. You know, and have this sense of freedom and playing whatever kind of music you want to play. You know, like he's an open book when it comes to that music.
Yeah.
So, and he learns. You know, so he brings in these young people to learn from them as well.
Yeah, and I'm thinking about the movie now. They're all saying, "Hey, man, we had all this cocaine." Well,
yeah.
Hello. I mean, you know, you were getting paid, maybe not in cash, but I mean, you know, yeah. It's cocaine isn't free, even in the 70s, I don't think, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's tricky. You know,
yeah.
You can get caught up in the lifestyle and not realize, you know, something has fallen to the wayside. You know.
Did you get sitting there talking to your grandma, and she's talking about so and so nodding out at the bar and this and that? Did that help you get hip to the fact that, man, I need to make sure I stay, you know, like I do not go down this path?
It definitely, talking to her and, you know, being around, even my mom too. And my mom dealt with some substance abuse issues and so forth. So I was definitely around drug culture a lot. You know,
right.
And even bar, you know, a lot of people drinking, and you know, it's legal, but it's still, you know, it's a different kind of atmosphere. But,
well, a substance abuse is abuse, whether it's legal or not.
Exactly. So, you know, I mean, I guess just kind of watching people and just seeing what happens, you know, kind of made me, you know, just keep focused or encourage me to just keep focused on what I really want to be doing. You know, like, I guess understanding that it's not just about this lifestyle. You know, of course, you know, you want to be hip and cool and the whole thing, but you also want to be getting things done, you know. So I guess just trying to take notice of where things get counterproductive, you know, and where you can be productive, you know. So it's tricky. It's hard to be around that. You know,
it is very hard to be around. So did you have any issues at one point in time, or did you? No. Let me tell you, man, somebody's watching you, because it is almost impossible to come from that background, especially if you have a parent that's got substance abuse issues, and it's almost, you know, because a lot of it is genetic. Yeah. So that's great, man. Congratulations to you, you know, for not having that. And someone's watching you. That's how I have substance abuse issues in my background. I've never once, I mean, I drank and did all the shit kids do, but I'm lucky. I have no addiction to stuff at all. And I've had a lot of that in my family. So I'm like so grateful for that, man, because I've seen it destroy people, man, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
You moved out to LA. What prompted you to do that? And also, I would love to hear some stories, if you could, about like Curtis Mayfield. To me, that guy was just a beautiful musician and incredibly. I mean, the only person, I don't know if you know Eric Krasno.
Mm-hmm.
He's the only guy I've seen, like when he does some of the stuff he does, it reminds me of Curtis. But I've never heard anybody like Curtis ever, man.
No. Yeah. I mean, he's definitely, to me, he's still like an unsung hero. Enough people don't know about him.
I got goosebumps right now, man. He's just amazing. And his catalog is massive, man.
I recently discovered the album Sparkle, Aretha Franklin. And I've always known a couple of songs from there and so forth, but maybe it was around the time she passed, but I just decided to check out that whole album because I knew he wrote all the songs on it and produced it. And it's unbelievable, that record, you know.
I'm going to check that out.
So that's another one that's a real testament to him as a producer and a writer, you know. But when I was a kid, because I was a toddler, I was like 3 or something. So like we lived in this house.
What made your mom move out there?
Well, we knew Curtis in Chicago still.
Okay.
So this is when my parents are still together and we were living on the south side of Chicago, and our house was like just the hub, and it was this constant party. There was always a million people in the house all the time, and it was just a whole scene. My mom was like a real sort of a tastemaker at that time, loved getting different kinds of people together and all kind of artists and writers, all kinds of people. So I don't know. She's just one of those people that hooked into the scene, and just she just knew everybody, you know. And but Curtis used to come by quite a bit. I was too little to have like, you know, any sort of obviously in-depth conversations. But one thing I do remember about him is that he had such a gentle spirit. Like if whatever you get from that, from listening to him, that's him.
Yeah.
Because, you know, even as a child, you know, you're really receptive to their energy, what they bring in the room. And he's one of those people, I loved it when he came by. Whenever he came by, I just was like, oh my, you know, I loved it. I just had to go hang up around him and my mom the whole time he was there. And he, you know, when he spoke to you, you didn't feel like he was speaking down to you because you're, you know, this big or whatever.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, he was just a really gentle spirit, you know. I wish I had been able to really get to know him, but I do just remember that much about him. You know, my mother loved him, and she was devastated when he had that accident with the lighting rig.
Totally tragic, man.
Yeah. And the same thing with Minnie Riperton. She was another one when she came by. I loved for her to come by. You know, she just, you know, just such a ethereal. She was just such a bright, you know, funny personality. And yeah, I just loved her. You know, she's just one of those people you light up as soon as she comes in, you know.
That's
so
cool,
that was, man. Yeah. So that was the only thing, nothing real specific. It wasn't until like when we moved to LA in the 70s. And then that's when, you know, we started hanging around Earth, Wind & Fire, which my mom knew because they originally were from Chicago, the Maurice White and Verdine White. They were all from Chicago. So,
and she just moved out there. What made her, like your folks split, and then she just
when they split, my mom bounced. She's like, I'm out. I'm going to LA.
Wow, man. You come from a line of strong women.
Yeah,
that's pretty cool, man.
Yeah, definitely.
I think that's important. Like in picking your own, that's probably very influential in picking. Because my mom was a very weak woman, and I was in my second marriage. I've been together 27 years, but my first, I just picked my mom. Mm-hmm. And like midway into that, I'm like, man, it just wasn't working. And the primary reason for me was I needed a stronger person. My wife is a very strong person now. And it's night and day when you have a strong partner.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And most of the, you know, the primary artists I work with are women. You know? Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm sure, and you got to be a strong woman to be successful in the music business.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's really cool, man. So you've gravitated to that they set the tone for you. That's really cool, man. Because that energy, I believe, it always, you seek that out and it seeks you out, you know?
Right.
Yeah. That's very cool, man.
Yeah.
All right. Clones of Dr. Funkenstein. How the hell did you wind up at that session, man?
Well, that was, I was living in LA with my mom. Me and my brother were living in LA. I was in 76 with my mom, and they were out there recording a lot. They recorded most of their stuff in Detroit at United Sound, but they also did a lot of stuff at Hollywood Sound in LA. And so they were there working on that record, and I think maybe Tales of Kid Funkadelic, that record also they were working on. And one of my mom's, she knew them, but also one of her best friends, Debbie Edwards, was a background singer that she sang on a lot of that stuff, sang on Mothership Connection and Clones and all that. And so when they'd have session, my mom would go hanging out, you know.
Oh, she just,
Yeah, so there was one night, I don't know, I don't remember where we were going, but she's like, oh, we got to stop by the studio, you know. I'm like, whatever. I don't know. I was like 9 years old or something.
Yeah.
And we go into Hollywood Sound, and I remember walking through, and on my left, I remember there's an ISO booth, and Michael Hampton, who's an unsung guitar hero, was in there with, I remember he was in there with a Marshall stack, and he was just sitting there with, he just wailing, just in there, just shredding. So I walked by him doing that. And then we get to the control room, and they open the door for us. And I think me and my brother, we're kids, so we're laughing. My brother's 6 years older than me. And I remember George turned around to me and went, like that, to be quiet. And his hair, he had these ace of spades shapes cut in his hair. And
I was going to ask you, was he George Clinton even off hours? Yeah, he was always George Clinton. That's funny, man.
Yeah. And Bernie Worrell was doing a mini Moog overdub, and he had it set up right at the side of the console. So I walked into the back of Bernie playing this track, and they were just getting this whole thing. So that was the first time I met George and Bernie. Yeah.
You know what? I know Michael Hampton, who he is, because he's still around.
Yeah.
I reached out to him about a year and a half ago on his, I don't know if he even got the email on the contact form, because I wanted to have him on the show, because I know exactly who that cat is, man. He's an amazing guitar player, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's funny that you said that. Holy shit.
Well, he gets overshadowed by Eddie Hazel, who is probably my favorite guitar player.
Yeah.
Eddie is incredible, but I felt like Michael's always kind of been in Eddie's shadow unfairly.
Yeah.
As a soloist,
Yeah. Well, because of Maggot Brain, man. I mean, that's.
Yeah.
I mean, come on. That's like.
Yeah. I mean, that's one of the most iconic guitar solos ever.
I mean, it's just, that whole track is just phenomenal. If you even kind of like guitar, you can't not listen to that and be completely polarized by that. And it's like 9 minutes long or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was so cool. I was in the city. Government Mule does their like New Year's run at the Beacon every year. And I took my son up, my older son, this is probably about 10 years ago. So he was 19 or 20 at the time. And we went on the 30th of December, and we go in, and they opened with that track with Maggot Brain. And I couldn't believe it.
Okay.
It was just to hear that played live, and they're a great band, I mean, Warren Haynes, a great guitar player, man. It was, and my son is like, "Dad, what is this?" I'm like, "I'll show you when we get home."
Yeah, right. I know. And Bernie had played with them off and on too.
Yes, he did. Right. Yeah. That's cool, man. Okay. So I'm sorry, you go into this. Okay. And so George was like, shh.
Yeah. So that's how we ended up there. And then I remember another time we stopped by, me and my brother were, going to see Earth, Wind and Fire play at the Forum, and they were definitely rival bands at the time. Sure. And we had to go by the studio first, and then I think my mom was sending us in a cab or something to the gig. And my brother was a huge Verdine White fanatic. Like, he was all Earth, Wind and Fire until we started hanging around, P-Funk and stuff. But he was super excited, and we walked in, and Glenn Goins, he's looked at us, and we were all smiling. He says, like, "What y'all so geeked out about? What you so happy about?" And my brother's like, "Oh, we're going to see Earth, Wind and Fire." And he said, "Oh yeah." He said, "They're going to be cool, but they ain't going to be the funk."
That is funny, man. That's one of those things you always remember, I'm sure, the way he said it, his inflection in his voice and everything, I'm sure. Yeah. That's cool. Yeah. And he's right. I hate to say it. Yeah. All right. So then you went back to Chicago. What precipitated that?
That was just a lot of back and forth, between my parents. I was still young then, so I was like 9. So, I ended up having to go back to Chicago just for specific, child care reasons.
I totally get it. Yeah, totally get it.
So then I went back to live with my grandmother for a while, and then I was kind of there until I finished high school. Then that's when I started going back out to LA.
But it sounds like at some point you were like an intern, maybe in a studio in Chicago. What was that about?
That was in the early '80s. My brother had these friends, Patrick Drummond, we called him Boogie, and Robert Garrett, we called him Sly. And they were both keyboard players. They had a band called The Plane that was almost more of a band in concept than an actual like band. But but Patrick Boogie in particular was so talented, that people, he would get approached about record deals and that kind of thing and stuff. And so he would get money to go into, they'd get money to go, to go into the studio to record stuff.
Okay.
So when I was 14, my brother was involved with the project, and so that was the first time they asked me, "You should come and play on this," And I was like, "Okay."
At 14, wow.
Yeah. So that was the first time I went, and that was the first session I ever did. That was actually at Streeterville, and
you playing bass?
I was playing guitar on that. My brother was playing bass at that time, and so I was playing guitar on the session. Then a couple of years later, after that, the same two guys were, to me, they were doing what you would call, they were more like interning at Jerem Studios. So they were basically engineering sessions throughout the day, and then the owners would pay them with free studio time at the end of the night.
Gotcha. So
I'd go by Jerem. I'd go there after school, whatever, and hang out on whatever they were session they were working on, and then when they finished the session, we'd record a bunch of stuff. So we just started cutting all the stuff. One thing ended up being a single eventually, which was hilarious. But but anyway,
is it still out there anywhere?
No, you can't find it now. But anyway, that was when I started learning about recording in the studio and just getting my chops that way. Yeah.
Growing up around all this music, what is your primary, what do you like to listen to?
I mean, I listen to everything. It's kind of like, I go in and out of phase. It depends on sort of what catches my ear at the time. If something would grab my ear, then I'll go do a deep dive in that,
Right. Yeah. I
mean, obviously I'm coming out of Funkadelic and Sly Stone and so forth. But particularly when I discovered Prince's music, particularly his album Dirty Mind, I could hear there was some new influences going on in there that I hadn't explored, that were coming more out of the new wave punk scene.
Yes.
So that led me to listening to, The Police and Depeche Mode and The Clash, and checking out things that were coming in from Britain and stuff during that time period. So if something, like I said, something grabbed my ear, then I'll always kind of do a real deep dive in it, and I'll just kind of get into that for a while.
Yeah, yeah.
Something else, grabs my interest,
Do you like, when you find a band, do you sort of like, especially nowadays, it's so nice to do this because you got, I have Apple Music, and and I resisted it for a really, really, really long time. But now I'll just if I want to explore a band, I'll download the whole damn catalog.
Right.
And because I want to learn, it's like their bio.
Right.
So you could see the evolution. Do you do something like that, or?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. It's so good, man, that to have this access.
I love doing that. Yeah.
All righty. So, from a musician's viewpoint, what was this like on the ground in these places, Chicago, LA, and even if New York City, if you know, in the R&B and funk scene, what was the viewpoint of the musician? Was it optimistic? Was it excited? Were the record companies allowing the artists to, because this was completely innovative. Were they trying to exert control over record? Because how would they know what's going to work? Because it was brand new.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's interesting. Especially in Chicago, it was such an interesting period, especially in that time that I was in, because that was also sort of where it was transitioning from funk and R&B into the whole hip hop world and so forth. And then also in Chicago, the house music scene.
Right.
So with hip hop and house, there's a lot of, do it yourself. First of all, there's a lot of that coming into play there. And also in that time with hip hop as well, people started figuring out, the power of the drum machine. So it started moving away from like bands into just more, studio world anyway. So for me, I think I came in sort of a unique way because I didn't start out necessarily like the traditional way of like doing gigs with bands, stuff, immediately going into studio mode.
Yes.
So I kind of built my way out of that. I didn't really start really gigging until I started playing with Wendy and Lisa. But so yeah, it was definitely exciting, but it felt sort of it just felt so transitional, like I said, because it was that phase of coming out of like the bands world where you got like 6 people in a band, to now people with a drum machine and sampling and all that stuff. And then with the whole club scene, there was a huge interest from labels that were coming in trying to sign people once they saw like the house music scene blew up. And I think people were trying to figure out how they could commercialize that, which that never happened because that music's not really designed for that, even though they try, although I feel like that music really got into the DNA of popular music, pop music now wouldn't be what it is now if there hadn't been house music, for instance.
Yes, absolutely.
But in that particular moment, it wasn't about here's our star and you're not going to have an album like that. It's about that music is about the experience.
Yeah.
And being in the club and in that scene, that's what that's all about.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. I remember I definitely used to meet a lot of those guys like DJ Farley and Jamie Principle and Steve Hurley and all. I remember meeting them. They were all around. And the other thing that was going on in Chicago too, there's a lot of crossover between that world and the industrial world because, Ministry started off in Chicago. And there's a studio in Chicago called Chicago Tracks where Ministry were doing all their stuff in one studio, and then the other studio is all the house music.
That's wild, man.
Kind of cross world of that whole thing, So yeah, it was really interesting time for sure.
Yeah, it was very similar in New York City with the influence. And if you think about it, the introduction of the drum machine, man, is what eventually led us to today where everything's done in the home.
Is the thread, yeah.
Yeah, man, and it's amazing. So when did that happen? The drum machine came out probably late 70s, early 80s?
Right.
So it was like a 35-year gestation to totally changing how music is made, pretty much. Really interesting.
Yeah.
All right, you mentioned Wendy and Lisa. How did you get that audition? And any cool stories about your experience working with them? Also, you said it was in your bio, it said it was ground zero for making a living as a full-time musician. What did you mean by that?
What I meant by that is that was the first time I got a gig as a musician, and they gave me a salary. Okay, this is what you're going to get every week. And I was getting a check every week for being, so that was the first time I was like, wow, I'm now making a living as a musician, and
that's really cool.
Tiny studio apartment in LA, and I was like, yeah, this is awesome. Yeah. And and that was the first time that's when I started touring, and just everything kind of sprung from that gig.
Did you see the movie Earl Slick narrated about sidemen?
I haven't seen. I need to watch that. A friend of mine told me about that movie. Yeah.
Wendy and Lisa are in there. There's a pretty big section. It was like Earl, who I had on this show, who's one of the hilarious human beings I've ever met. But he's like, real New York, his whole accent and everything. But it was him, Bernard Fowler, and Wendy and Lisa were the primary. It was just very interesting. They talked about, the highs and lows of being a sideman. And, in their own particular situations, how they felt and that they were such an integral part of this, and all of a sudden they're cut loose and like, what? And I think that's just the nature of being a sideman. And their first gig just happened, or the first big sideman gig happened to be with Prince. And so I think they fell hard
Yeah.
And it's a tough lesson to
Yeah. And I've definitely have learned that lesson myself even after that. But I think you have to really understand when you're working with a solo artist, no matter how much it might get to a point where it feels like a band, maybe, it really just isn't,
Yeah.
I mean, and you have to be okay with that, because the artist might just change directions on a dime, and they're entitled to do that. That's why it's not a band, Yeah. And for Wendy and Lisa, I'm sure it was devastating, Prince and the Revolution. I mean, he really presented it as, this is a band and this is it. And
that's exactly what they talked about.
Yeah. And they were a huge part of it, so forth. And then he decides he wants to change games and just change direction and just cut some loose out the blue, So that's a real extreme case of it.
Yeah.
And very public case of it, but I've been involved with the artists where I've done tours, and it's and you do all this work on the road, and then they go and they make a record, and all of a sudden they bring in a producer, and they hire all these other players. Like, how come I just did 6 weeks on the road with you or whatever,
Yeah.
How come I'm not involved in the but that's just how it goes sometimes, if they have a vision and they bring a producer in and they share a vision and they talk about what they need to make that happen.
Right.
And, it doesn't always feel good, but you just kind of you just got to go, okay, that's just part of it.
Yeah, very much so. I've had people, like, out of the blue, the artist's wife says, hey, you need to have all women, or you need to have all men, or,
right.
I had one guy was hired, and then he got fired. He did all the rehearsals, and then they fired him because they decided they needed to wear leather pants, and he and he was older. And I'm like, wait a minute, but you were that age, right, 8 weeks ago when they hired you, right? And he goes, I sure was. So I've heard all these things.
Right.
Yeah. And it's a very real, and the most dangerous is, one person I interviewed, a sideman, said, oh, we're best friends. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, man, and I'm not his therapist or counselor, but man, that, to me, that seems to be a dangerous thing to feel, like you're good. I would think you want to feel like, when it comes to work, we're really tight. Mm-hmm. But when you start thinking we're best friends, then if something happens and you get let go, it's like, yeah, it's tough.
Yeah.
It's a tough road. You got to be cognizant of that, is what it seems.
Yeah. Like. Yeah. You have to be prepared for that. Otherwise you will be really disappointed,
Any cool stories from working with Wendy and Lisa?
Like I said, firstly, it was the first tour that I ever did, and we went to Europe. That was my first time going to Europe, and it was a bus tour, and I had a guitar tech, and
wow.
This was all like,
so really, you were like big time on their first gig.
Yeah.
Nice.
It's funny because Wendy, her first tour was the Purple Rain tour, so she's like,
talk about stepping in it, man.
Yeah. She says they always call it that tour, the Beatles tour, because it was just so much insanity around. Her and Wendy her and Lisa had their own bus. The guys in the band had their own bus.
That's
Prince had his own bus. There was all, it's insane. So yeah, so their tour, that was definitely like a nice cushiony first tour to get into. And it was great. And particularly in Europe, because people, their profile, I feel was a lot higher in Europe, and people were still really fanatical about them too.
Yeah.
When you're there. So yeah, it was just really fun. There's no real specific stories I can think of other than just that tour happened was pretty amazing.
Yeah, that is.
And then the tour that I did, I think I did one more tour with them for the record that followed that one, and then then I started playing with Chris Connelly, and I did a van tour. So that was the first time I did the van or the U-Haul, lugging the gear and the
Oh
U-Haul.
my God. That must have been like
backdrop at the gigs, and and it was just crazy rock and roll tour. I was like, oh, okay, so that's what this is.
Yeah. One thing they came across like they had really good work ethics. Like they were really very committed to doing a good job. That was very impressive.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I've rehearsed with anyone more than I did with them. I mean, I feel like we were in rehearsal for like a month or 2 months or something before we even started touring.
Wow. Okay.
I mean, it was a lot, and full day. That's what I mean when I say ground zero. It was like we would go in, we'd start at 11 or noon or something and go to like 7 at night every day.
Wow. So it was a really good experience for you.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So that was the first time I was doing something musically where I could really saw the discipline and just focus. And, I had never experienced that before.
Sure.
And just consistency. Yeah.
Chris, let me ask you, I'm going to mention a bunch of artists. So if you could talk about how you got the gig with them and any cool or interesting stories about working with them. Let's talk about a guy who feels incredibly talented is Doyle Bramhall II.
Mm-hmm. Again, I met Doyle through Wendy and Lisa because they produced his first solo record.
Really?
Yeah, the first record he did for Geffen. It was the first one he did after the Archangels. And then he ended up marrying Wendy's twin sister, Susanna, actually. But anyway, so I met him through that, and I actually helped him write a lot of the record Jelly Cream, which got him the deal with
Great
RCA.
record, man. Yeah. What a great record. Wow. So I didn't know, that's kind of weird. I wouldn't have thought Wendy and Lisa. Wow. Total outside the genre. So they produced his first record, and they brought you in to play bass?
Actually, I actually didn't play on that record. I was living in Chicago again, I think, when that was happening. But I would come to LA for sessions and things like that here and there, and so I met him at that particular time. And then I think he heard some demos or some things that I had worked on or something. And anyway, somehow it was suggested to him that he should try writing with me. So I was living in Chicago at the time, so Doyle flew into Chicago, and we worked on a bunch of demos in my apartment at the time.
Wow.
And he took them back, and that's what got him his deal with RCA.
Great record, man.
Yeah, I love that record.
That was a really good record.
Yeah, and that was the first record that Chad Blake produced the record. And he's a legendary engineer, and Charlie Drayton was the drummer on that. And I had met Charlie before that too, but it was great to play with him on that. So yeah, I played both bass and some guitar on that record.
That's really cool, man. We saw him down here again with my son 2 records ago when he did when he toured down here. Great show, man. Really great show. Great player, man. Great player.
He's ridiculous.
Yeah, great. A lot of, he's a very soulful cat.
Yeah. Great singer too. Yeah.
He really is, man. He's got it, he's got it going, man. And any interesting or cool stories working with him?
I remember, we had a really great tour. We did a tour opening for Clapton.
Yeah. That ain't a bad gig.
No. Yeah. Eric asked him to come over. That was for the album Welcome. So that was really fun, that tour. And that's when I met Billy Preston. He was in and out of Eric's tour a lot during that time. That's when he was getting, I think, kidney dialysis and stuff, so he had to leave for a while and then come back. So it would be great to chat with him.
What was he like? What talk about another
great. He was so nice. He was such a nice person. And, but I remember asking him, because there's one of my favorite artists is Sly Stone, and There's a Ride Going On is one of my all-time favorite albums. And there's so much mystery around what happened and who's playing what and so forth. And so I asked Billy, what stuff did he play on? And he told me that he's actually the second keyboardist on almost all of those early Sly records up until through Fresh. And specifically, he told me he plays the Wurlitzer on Family Affair. That's Billy.
Oh man, very cool.
And so when I go back and hear it now, I can hear it now.
You can hear. How come? How many? Does he have a lot of solo records?
Billy?
Yeah,
he's got quite a few. Yeah,
I wonder. He only, his big hits were phenomenal, but I'm surprised he didn't have. He's more like I wanted to hear more Billy. That I guess it just didn't.
He has a pretty rich catalog of stuff. You should check it out.
Yeah, I am. I'm going to go back and because all I know is of
going in circles or
right. Nothing from nothing.
Right. Yeah. No, there's a lot of great stuff.
Okay, I'm going to go back. I got to dig into his catalog now because I love that guy, man. He's a great musician.
And I asked him, and also he's someone that's played with he's played with the Stones, and the Beatles, just everybody. And I asked him, I said, so, you've played with all these people, but who's, do you have a favorite? Like, who's your favorite musician you play with? And he said that hands down, Sly Stone is the best musician he's ever played with.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's very cool. You know who I saw at NAMM? I saw Bootsy Collins at NAMM walking around. It was the funniest thing, man. He was in full Bootsy gear. Man, honestly, the dude with the hat was at least 7 feet tall. I'm not a big guy. I'm like 5'9". I'm less like, but this is real funny, man. He had a woman walking around with him, and she was feeding him. I said, you gotta be a bad motherfucker in 2020 to have a woman walking around with you feeding you. I couldn't believe it. It was so funny. And then he had another. It was a very small, it was just like this woman and some, a buddy of his. But it was just so funny to see him because it's like, man, it's Bootsy Collins. It was just, it was a trip, man. Really funny to see you just walking through the aisle getting fed.
Right.
Meshell, how did you get hooked up with Meshell? You've had such a great long-term relationship with her.
And she's another that I met through Wendy and Lisa. Because they played on her second record, Peace Beyond Passion. And and I remember talking to Wendy, and she was going on about how incredible this artist was she's working with, so forth. But I met Meshell in LA, I think at Wendy's sister's house. I think it might have been the first time I met Meshell. And then in the mid-90s, I guess. And then I went to I went to LA. I think I had just moved back to LA, and I went there to record the Jelly Cream record with Doyle. And but when I got there, Doyle was in a session with Meshell he was working on the album Bitter. And he told me I should come down. So I was like, okay. And I came down, and Craig Street was the producer. That's when I first met Craig and also worked with him. Abe Laboriel Jr. was the drummer on that session.
That's crazy, man.
And Lisa of Wendy and Lisa, Lisa Coleman, she was playing keys on the session. And so I ended up playing on, a handful of songs for that record. So that's when I first met Meshell and worked with her. And then I know she called me about going on tour with her for that record, but I had to turn it down at that particular moment because I think it was on the road with Seal. And then I guess it was 2005, maybe, she was promoting a record called The World Has Made Me the Man of My Dreams.
Great title, man.
And she was looking to change up the band a little bit. And I had just run into her at a friend's going away party in New York, actually. And then I went back home to LA, and a couple days later, I get a call from her manager at the time asking me if I wanted to go on a road with her. And I was like, yeah, sure. Okay. And then they sent me a copy of the record, and that record is really amazing. People really slept on that album. Actually, it's a great record.
The world has made me the man I am today.
It has made me the man of my dreams.
It has made me the man of my dreams. What a great title.
Yeah.
For a female artist.
Yeah. Yeah, for anybody in that matter. But anyway, yeah. So that's when I started working with her, and it just kept going.
That's great, man. It's funny how serendipity like I just was in New York, you said, and I happened to
Yeah.
bounce. Yeah. That's so cool. I love hearing that, man.
Yeah, I was there hanging out with Craig Street, and so we had a few mutual friends, and so it was some party that Craig brought me to, and Meshell just happened to be there. Yeah,
I hear this so often. It's really, it's really made me a very strong believer in destiny, fate, a higher power or something that, man, like karmically, these things, when you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, like the universe lines up with you and really supports that.
mm-hmm.
I hear these stories, and I've seen it with my own show that I meet this guy who introduces me to this guy, and it's just really cool when it's nice to get that support from the universe. It's kind of like, hey man, keep doing this.
Yeah, right. Yeah, you just have to stay aware and be open.
Be open. Yeah,
pay attention. Yeah,
and be open and listen. MC Search. How did you get hooked up with him? I didn't know he did solo stuff.
Yeah, he did one solo record. That's funny you zeroed in on that. That was a random session. I had a friend in LA named Carmen Rizzo, who's he does a lot of electronic music and he's a producer and so forth, but he was getting into production in the early 90s, and so he'd get these sessions and he always called me to come and play guitar on different things.
Right on.
So these weird random things like Belle Biv DeVoe and Howard Hewitt and just like this, really random stuff. MC Light, that was another thing.
That's funny.
And so that was one of those sessions. MC Search, I can't remember. I feel like that session was at someone's home studio too. I remember that much. And the only thing I just remember he was really funny. He was hilarious and had all these great one-liners. It was like just hanging out with a stand-up comedian the whole time.
But that's what their whole routine kind of seemed like, And the reason I zeroed on him is because I'm a New York guy, and they were from Brooklyn, I think, right? So they were very popular in New York City, so it was like MC Search, holy shit, I gotta ask about, because their whole thing was so funny, man. It was just the whole premise of like a chubby white dude and another white dude doing this like really good rap was funny in the first place, man. It was like, what? It was like the words and the music don't match. Wait a minute, it was just it was just, the whole thing was hilarious, man, and they were great.
He was really nice. I never saw him ever again after that session, but I really enjoyed working with him.
Right on. Beck, what did you do with Jeff Beck? You played bass on one of his records, right?
Yeah, that was
how the hell did that come about?
On a couple of things on that record. That came through Trevor Horn.
Dude, that's pretty badass when Trevor Horn's and all these producers are recommending you, man. That's like speaks volumes to your ability to get along with people and to understand that you're in the service business and provide good service, man, for sure.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah. And Trevor's great. He's been really, he's a really inspiring person that I've worked with. But this, a producer, I think his name was Steve Lipson, who's engineered for Trevor and done things for him, was producing the record. And Jeff, I think at the time was looking to do something a little bit different from what he had been doing. He had been playing with Tall Winkenfeld a lot and Vinnie Colaiuta.
Yeah.
And so I think he was just looking for something different in the rhythm section department. And so Trevor recommended me and a great drummer. He's also a good friend of mine, Earl Harvin, on drums for that. And it was a crazy session because I had this accident maybe a week or so before that session where I fell and dislocated one of my fingers.
Wow, that's
my fretting hand. Yeah, the third finger on my fretting hand. And so I had to just go through all this stuff just to get that finger even up and working. I was wearing this little kind of braid sleeve on it to bring the swelling down. I'd have to keep it on there all the time if I wasn't doing anything. And so when I got to the session, I told Earl, who, like I said, we were really good friends. I said, look, this just happened to me. So just be aware,
Yeah.
But I also felt like at the same time, it was the best kind of therapy for me to do, because that's why I use that hand and that finger, so why not play,
Yeah. Not too much pressure though, that it's like Jeff Beck.
It was like the worst time
in
the world. But it was really fun. We had a really good time. The most fun about it is actually we just got to jam a lot with him, and he just has endless ideas of things he can just play all day and just keep going. And but we were playing, I remember one of the funnest jams is we did a Manic Depression, and
that's cool.
He loves Hendrix. Who doesn't? But he really, and he knew him and so forth. But you could tell there was a real true love for what he did, and Earl plays that drum groove like Mitch Mitchell. Like he totally has that whole thing down.
That's a whole groove, that song.
Yeah, we launched into it. Jeff just jumped right in there, and we just jammed on that for I don't know how long. That was great. And then Jeff also is a Sly Stone fan, and we started playing this. There's a version of "Thank You for Letting Me Be Myself" on "There's a Riot Going On." It's more slowed down, like tempo. And so we were playing that version, and he just loved it and just jumped in. And it's just, again, we just had this really long jam on that song. And then, and also one of my favorite moments in that session was, I don't even know how it happened, but we were in the control room, and for some reason, someone started playing Stevie Wonder's "Looking for a Pure Love," and Jeff plays that gorgeous solo on there. And so I don't even know why that was being played, but it was on. But it's so great to sit there with him listening to that solo.
Yeah.
And him kind of going through the experience of that all over again, in live time. It was just great to sit there with him and listen to that,
Did you pick up anything as a guitar player watching him?
Honestly, I can't say that I did. There's a lot of mystery in his playing, and the way he uses the whammy bar and his things with harmonics is just, you're looking at him and it's like, it doesn't even make any sense to me,
I had Jennifer Batten on here. She played with him for 3 years, and I had Carmen Vandenberg on here. She played with him for about a year, and I asked them both, especially Jennifer. She's a brilliant woman, brilliant guitar player, very well educated. And I asked her the same question. She said, Craig, I stood on stage with this guy every night for 3 years, and I don't know I'm not one step closer. Exactly your answer. She goes, I'm not one step closer to understanding how and what he does today than I was then. Yeah.
I mean, I just know, the playing part is, like I said, it's kind of mystifying, but he's just so open. Like he's like a receptor. Like I said, he can just keep playing. He never runs out of ideas or things to do. Like that was really amazing. Just watching him do that more than anything. Just listening to him was just incredible.
Yeah. Anybody that you want to talk about, and then we'll talk about Craig Street. I know you want to talk about him, but any other artists that you work with that are cool or memorable or nostalgic for you?
What could I say? I'm just looking at my notes that you gave me.
No, all good, man.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, also, I guess, like Joe Henry also is a real great influence. He has a lot to do. Like he produced Solomon Burke, and I played on that record. And he produced a project called To Believe My Soul, which is there's like a house band on the record, but there's all these different artists like Mavis Staples, Alan Toussaint. I think that's when I met Alan Toussaint, was on that session. Billy Preston was a part of that session, and
wow,
a lot of those legends. Mavis Staples, I had a great moment with her on that session. We were covering a Curtis Mayfield song, actually, "Keep On Moving."
Great song.
And I got this tremolo guitar sound for it, and Pops played with tremolo a lot on his guitar. And when I started playing it, she was like, "Oh, you sound like my dad," and then her sister was around, and Yvonne, she was, "Yvonne, don't you sound like Dad?" and then
dude, that's pretty freaking cool. Yeah, Mavis Staples is grooving on what you're doing.
Yeah, and then she told me, she was like, "I'm going to call you Baby Pops." Like, okay,
that's awesome. Yeah, I'll take it. Right? Yep. Yeah, that's great.
But Joe, kind of similarly to Craig, works in that way of having like all the musicians on the floor. It's like mostly live on the floor style production. You get a great engineer like Husky Hoskildsen or Ryan Freeland, and just like prior to working with Craig and Joe, most of the sessions were almost purely overdub land for a while. Especially after the in the mid '80s, everyone's so obsessed with like things being so clean and locked in and so forth. So that was my entry. Also just in terms of like how to use amps and small amps versus big amps and that kind of thing. That's when that whole thing came into play for me, was working with them.
Do you want to talk about Craig in particular? Because I know he was a huge influence on you.
Yeah.
And tell people who he is also, and any specific work that you did together that and why he was so influential.
Yeah. Well, to me, Craig is a legendary producer that I feel is overlooked. And he's definitely, to me, was one of the game changers. As like I said, particularly in terms of he really started doing these live on the floor production when people really weren't doing that so much. And he made these 2 records with Cassandra Wilson, Blue Light Till Dawn and New Moon Daughter, which were really influential records. And everyone wanted to work with him after that, like Katie Lang and Gypsy Kings. And, he's done a lot of incredible work. So the first time I worked with him was on the Meshell record, Bitter. And again, that was the first time we were actually all playing live together, and so that there's that aspect of it. And then also he's the person that really got me into alternate tunings, because prior to him, I didn't really explore that much, or I didn't experiment with it just because I couldn't really, it took me a while before I understood it.
Yeah, it's not easy shit. It's hard enough to play a guitar like EADB, you know what I'm saying?
Exactly.
It's really like next level playing, I think.
Yeah. Even Wendy experiments with it quite a bit because she's really influenced by Joni Mitchell. So I remember when I was playing with them, there's one song we had to play in a tuning, and I learned it just because I had to learn the song, but I just couldn't understand it as a concept at all. But Craig really pushed me in that way, where it's really become it's definitely a tool that I use quite a bit now, just for certain voicings and things like that. And also he really got me back on guitar, because after I worked with him, I kind of got landed on bass for a while. Actually, I toured with Joe Henry as a bass player, and I went on the road with Doyle for a long time as a bass player. So I really kind of got off the guitar for a while.
Right.
And when I came off the road from some of that stuff, Craig hired me, of all things, for a Manhattan Transfer session.
Oh my God.
On guitar. And then there was another record we did with this classical singer named Jubilant Sykes, who wanted to do kind of more of a pop record. And we were doing things like God Only Knows, Beach Boys song. Yeah. We did a cover of that. And And there would be a number of times where I'm trying
That's a pretty complicated song. There's a lot of stuff.
It's already complicated. I know.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff going on there, man.
And he told me about that song. He's like, yeah, I want you to play this, but I wanted to feel like a Neil Young song. I'm like, what?
It's tough enough to make it feel like the Beach Boys song. That's not an easy song, man.
Yeah, and so he was really intent on like taking it out of that mode. And he would always be the first one. Why don't you try this tuning, or try a Nashville tuning, or try the,
Yeah.
So I would just experiment and just start turning knobs until I started really kind of finding a thing with it. But so just one, he really got me back to that instrument, but also exploring it in ways that I hadn't explored it before. So I feel like he was really instrumental in a lot of growth that I had as a guitar player. And also, he was the first person to put me in a room with Greg Leisz. Who else? I mean, just, he always had great players on the sessions. Abe Jr. and Abe Laboriel Jr.
Yeah, Abe Jr. I mean, the thing is, when you listen to his dad on bass, then you're like, I get it now. Because if you're younger, all you've seen is Abe Jr. And then you're like, how could he be so talented? Oh, because his dad is probably in his mid to late 70s, and he's still killing it. Right. Killing it. Like, how the hell is this going on? Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Great musical family.
And there's a great bass player, David Pilch, who's an incredible upright player, who was on a lot of the sessions with Craig as well. And he's just amazing to play with, so you're just in this room with all these great people. So you can't help but get inspired and just find some new things to do. It would just push you into new territory.
That's so cool.
With them. Yeah.
Craig must be a guitar player himself, though, correct?
Yeah, he does play some guitar. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Because to recommend, it's one thing to recommend mics, equipment, but to be that viscerally aware of the changes in dynamics and sound that an alternate tuning can make, you got to be a guitar player,
right,
to make those recommendations. That would be really weird. That's great, man. Very cool.
Yeah.
Tell me just the top 3 musical experiences you had. Could be studio, live, whatever you'd like. Which is a tough question, I know. And I know that you're not sliding any other art. Listen, let's put a disclaimer. Chris is not sliding any other artists if they're not in the top 3. Yeah. He loves you all.
Right. Well, I think actually most recently, in December of last year, I went into a studio with Meshell for this Baldwin piece I'd mentioned to you, this James Baldwin piece.
Man, talk about that.
So, she had a concept, she'd been reading a lot of his work and got this concept that she really wanted to do something that would help put his voice out in the world in a different kind of way. So
for people who don't know James Baldwin, just if you could tell people, give like a brief overview of who he is.
God, he's, he's just one of the greatest writers, one of America's greatest writers. And he wrote on everything, he was just also very forward-thinking person, talking about anything from civil rights and he was a gay man and Black in those days and was, didn't hide it either. He's just a very courageous person that was really making great effort to make sense of what was going on in the world politically at that time, and also just how he was projecting things that would happen in the future. But he's just a real hero of the people, of all people, and he just needs much more exposure than he's had even. So I hope I'm not doing him a disservice. I'm just at a loss of words. How do I describe James Baldwin?
No. I just wanted to give people an overview if they never heard him. If they want to get turned on to him, he's a writer, basically an activist and a writer.
Yeah.
But dude, talk about like the most, and this is back in the late 60s.
Yeah.
What's the most difficult thing? Hey, let me be black, gay, and an activist.
Right.
Talk about like having to overcome stuff.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Starting in the early 60s. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
So you're doing this project. Meshell wanted to put his words out there more.
Yeah. She put together, so it's been sort of almost like a multimedia piece, but it's almost more theatrical than a traditional like music concert. So there's a poet that's involved, Stacey Ann Chen, who's incredible. She's an incredible writer herself. There's a couple of different singers, because Meshell wanted to have some different voices in it. And we use a lot of Baldwin's writing in the text or themes for certain songs and things like that. But the music is, to me, it's very like modern spiritual music, and it's really open, and it's rhythmic too at the same time. I mean, to me, it feels kind of like stuff that maybe Pharoah Sanders was doing, or it's that feeling, or Coltrane, Love Supreme. It's that, like I said, real spiritual. Just to me, you get a sense of, you feel history in what we're doing, but also there's something that's futuristic about it as well. But it's hard to describe. But I'm really excited about this record, and we finally decided to do a definitive recording project of it. So we recorded it all in December at Dreamland Studios, which was a great place for it. It's an old church that's been a recording studio since 1986. So it's a really great big live room. And
is it in Memphis?
No, it's in Woodstock.
It's in Woodstock.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's cool. That's such a cool place. Just going up there is so.
Yeah.
That's just a cool place, man.
Yeah. So, and for the session we had two keyboard players. At one point we even had three keyboard players on a couple of sessions, bass, guitar, and then the vocalist, and then the poet. But and the studio is managed by Jerry Murata, who's a legendary drummer who played with Peter Gabriel and played on Hall & Oates record. He was a great session player. So he has all kinds of percussion and drums in there. They have almost kind of every organ in the world you can think of, Laurie organs, Farfisa, B3s, there's just everything in there. And the room is so huge, so you can mic it all in all kinds of ways and everything. So we just had a ball with just figuring out how do we want this to sound, and just moving things around, and just having all the percussion just made a world of difference. It's just such a great, it's like a secret weapon, percussion, when you throw that into the mix. But it was just really fun and creative, and also it's a residential studio, so we're kind of like, we're in that mode kind of like 24/7, so it's great to just.
Oh, so you're living there?
Yeah. So you just get up and we would just get right into it and work until 8 or 9 o'clock that night, so it was great. We cut like 22 songs there or something in 4 days or something like that.
Are you serious? That's like overdrive, man. Wow. What was your role on there? You're playing guitar. Did you do any writing, producing? I'm
co-producing with Meshell.
Right on, man.
And I did some co-writing on some of the stuff as well. Yeah.
And you play guitar?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I play guitar. Yeah. I think I played bass on one or two things, with mainly guitar and all that. Yeah.
All right. So that's one. Give me two more.
Let's see. So that's that. Oh, also, the record I did with there's a record I made with Joe Henry called Tiny Voices. That was another really fun recording to be involved in. That was a huge session. We had two horn players, two keyboard players, Patrick Warren and Dave Palmer, and Jay Belrose was playing drums on that, and Jennifer Condos on bass. But Joe just wrote these really beautiful songs, and he just didn't want them to sound like anything else that he had heard. And Husky Huskolds was the engineer, and he's a very adventurous engineer. So going back into the control room for playback was always the extra level of like, okay, now what's it going to sound like? But again, it was another thing where it was just Joe was just so open to all the ideas, and so everyone was just trying all these new things, and then having the horn players playing live with us at the same time as well. And it was just it's kind of like, when I think about it now, it just seemed very dreamlike, when it was happening. It's just the best records to me is when you're in it, you just feel like it's its own world. Like there's nothing that exists outside of that while you're doing it. Those are my favorite things to be involved in.
That's the ecosystem for, right. Man, that's really cool. Yeah. That's very cool. And give me one more.
Another, I guess, was I got to play with Tom Waits once.
Let me tell you something before you go. The number one favorite artist, I've had 650, maybe 660 people on my show. Tom Waits is I mean, it's just, I've got to get that guy on my show at some point. Yeah. Everybody is like, he's come up more than anybody. It's really funny, man. Really funny. Yeah. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. It's just mind blowing, man.
That's hilarious. But I did Neil Young has the Bridge School benefit that he does every year. And so Tom was invited to play that a few years ago. And a friend of mine here in New York, Jim Keller, who is a great singer-songwriter himself, he actually wrote 8675309.
Oh, yeah, man.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
And I think he handles Tom's publishing. And they're good friends, but Tom possibly needed a guitarist for doing this Bridge show. And I say possibly because the other guitar player that was maybe going to do it or not do it was David Hidalgo.
Oh, from Los Lobos.
Yeah, it was incredible.
Yeah, really good.
And so I think Tom just wasn't sure if David could commit to it or not. And so there was a lot of back and forth. And he had to do rehearsals for the gig. And Dave couldn't make the rehearsals. So he was like, well, why don't you come up and rehearse with us anyway?
Just in case.
And just in case, I was like, okay, great, cool. So I went up to his place in Northern California. He's got this old schoolhouse that he's had for years that he's converted. That's his studio. That's where he records and rehearses and everything. And there's all kinds of crazy, as you can imagine, crazy instruments all over the place. And with the first thing that was hilarious, so I brought a steel dobro with me. Okay. That was the only thing I brought. I didn't know what to bring. I knew there wasn't going to be any electric guitar playing. So I brought that. And when I pull it out, the first thing Tom says to me is, I hate those things.
Nice. That makes you feel welcome day one, doesn't it?
Great. He's like, but maybe you'll get me to like them,
All right. That's funny, though, man. It's always, when stuff like that happens, it's like, okay, you always want to start off on the right foot. And it's like,
yeah, it was hilarious.
Yeah, that is funny.
So I played it for a little while. And then eventually he did get tired or just wanted to hear something else. But I think he's just like that anyway. And he'll do it to anyone in the room. He'll just grab something and come and hand it to you. And just whatever it is, okay, cool. I guess this is what I'm playing. I'm going to deal with this.
What a cool way to make music.
Yeah, yeah. And and he told me too that like in terms of the songs, he's not stuck on the recorded versions at all. He just feels like, okay, that's a documentation of the song. But he says that he's still always trying to find something. He's always cracking the code on these songs every time he plays them.
That's cool.
So we'll work on something and totally take it completely away from where it was, and then the next day go back to the beginning of it all of a sudden, you know.
Interesting, man.
He loves to just explode things and see where it goes. And sometimes it maybe he finds something, he stays there, or he's like, okay, let's just go back to such and such. You know, it was really interesting. But he handed me this guitar that was from 1920. It had, like, of course, this really challenging action on it, but sounded really cool and stuff. But he definitely likes to have people kind of at the line of their limitation, you know.
That's so cool, man.
Sense. Yeah. When you think of his music, and then the second day of rehearsal, because Les Claypool was actually the bass player for this gig.
Wow.
So
okay.
The next day, Les couldn't be there, and he was playing upright bass. And Tom was like, "Well, you play bass. Why don't you play bass today?" And I'm like, "Well, I'm not an upright player, which I'm not at all. Like, which I always feel is like a handicap of mine. I've just never owned an upright, you know, so I just don't."
But how many times have you gotten called in to play upright, though?
I've played twice.
Yeah, I mean, you've had a pretty good career, you know.
Right.
You get a pass on that one, man.
Yeah, right. So, so anyway, so I ended up playing bass on this rehearsal, and also I realized how much I remembered the bass lines from his records actually anyway. So
that's cool.
It was pretty funny, but he was just at the end, he's like, "Yeah, you need to get one of those things and keep practicing." You know, he was like into it. You need to get one of those. You know, it's hilarious.
Yeah, that's not.
But anyway, we did the gig.
You don't go on Reverb that night and just say, "Let me grab one of those."
Yeah, right. But the gig was incredible. And Hidalgo did show up. And
he did.
Tom decided to keep me on anyway.
Nice.
So it was both me and Hidalgo and Les Claypool. His son, his name's Carrie, I don't want to get his name, Casey, was playing drums. And Tom was playing upright piano. And he brought his own upright piano. Like, he brings all of his own gear, brought his upright piano to the gig. I brought that 1920 guitar. Like, he brings all of his stuff.
That's cool.
He wanted us to all wear black. And I remember when I went there, I didn't know if I was doing the gig or not, and no one told me of any dress code or anything. So they were like, "Well, you're doing the gig, so we got to get you clothes." So they went out and bought me like all black clothes for the gig.
That's pretty cool.
So when he goes on stage, at least particularly for this gig, I don't know if he does this regularly, he asked all of the band to come huddle around him so you couldn't see him. And we're all in black. And so we walk out in this mass into the middle of the stage, and we break apart, and all of a sudden Tom is there. And the audience just totally lost their mind. It was great. I mean,
that is cool.
That was one of the most rapturous receptions I've witnessed, I think, ever. You know, they were so happy to see him. And also, I just remember now, that's the same day Lou Reed passed. Not that it's relevant to the story, but it just, there was a feeling in the air that day, I guess, because of that. But he, to me, was, I would have to say, he is absolutely the strongest front person or performer I've ever been on the stage with.
Tom Waits,
he's amazing, you know. And so just to be there and witness that, it was worth it. It was just incredible. Yeah.
Well, man, entertainment, I mean, there's a skill set and an art there. You don't just like get up on stage and you're great, you know, learning how to control a crowd, doing things like that thing where you're all in the huddle, which is, you know, it's all about engaging your audience and understanding how to engage them. That is like energy wise linked up with who you are as a person, as a performer, and as an act. That's not random stuff. That has to be thought out, tested, experimented, worked on, tweak this, tweak that's good, that's not good. And that's such an important skill set that you need to be a longevity that the guys had, man. There's a reason why. Yeah. Very cool story, man. Thank you.
Yeah.
What were some of the low points, Chris, or dark periods you've had to deal with in life, and how'd you get through them?
Well, I mean, yeah, I just think like with anything, there's just, there's definitely some peaks and valleys. And, you know, and I've definitely went through a period where, you know, I lost a home, you know, because I wasn't working as much.
Sure.
You know? had to sell guitars I loved, so forth. And, then going through a period where, I lost both my parents in the same year. And
man, I'm so sorry. That's sick. Tough. Sorry, bro.
Yeah. And they were both sick for very long periods and living in two different places. So I'm trying to go back and forth.
Oh, man.
I was living with my father through his thing. My brother was taking care of our mom. He's a caregiver along with at-home hospice care. So he at least had some help there. But I would be back and forth between those two things. But anyway, just going through that stuff, through just the changes that happen within this business anyway. It can be challenging, but I guess just having faith that you're going to get through it is just how you get through, and just surrounding yourself with inspiring people and people that encourage you, and just having a good support system around you. I mean, that's just the only way you can kind of get through those periods,
it's critical, man, that support system, man. I don't know how, I don't know how people get through life without it.
Right.
You gotta have someone's shoulder to cry on and someone to kick your ass in those days, to keep you moving.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Let me ask you this. Why do you think, I'm not putting you on the spot because I know you're a humble guy. I'm not asking you to brag on yourself. Why do you think you get the call? What are you bringing to the table that makes other people's lives easier?
Well, I think, one thing, I think I have a very calming energy.
Yeah, man, you are calming, man. I can tell you right now. Yeah.
So even if I come into a situation that can seem a little chaotic, I think I can kind of help bring that down a notch. And also when I come into sessions or rehearsals or whatever, I like to get straight to work. I don't really like to of course you do a 2-minute catch up, but let's get to work, So I really try to get the focus on that. And also, it's, to me, whatever the song is, it's really important to get to the, what the song's trying to say and how it should feel, and and just start creating a mood about it and setting up a feel. So a lot of times, if I know what the song is, I'll usually start playing something to try to kind of get people in a certain zone, even if it's subliminal or whatever.
Sure.
But so I feel like tend to be kind of the glue a lot of times.
Yeah, I can see
in
that.
the situations that I'm in. There can be other players around that maybe speaking up more, but I feel like I'm I help provide a foundation that's also important to what the song is feeling like, and with the mood of it. Yeah. So they give room to these players to move around more,
Yeah. You also, Chris, you seem like you have a really good ability to almost approach everything. At least this is the vibe I get from you, that you walk in with a clean sheet of paper every time. I get the sense that you're totally open. You have no preconceived notions outside of you've done your homework, whatever. But I get the sense that you're really able to walk in with a clean sheet of paper and sort of let the canvas be written there. Like you're not having you haven't sketched out anything even in light pencil.
Right.
And I think that's a skill set.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely try to go in that way as much as I can. There's every once in a while I might get wound up about something,
Sure.
Maybe there may be someone involved and I'm like, oh, what's this going to, whatever.
Yeah, man.
But really, I'd say 99% of the time, once I walk in the room, that's, like you said, that's the beginning. And then we just go from there. Okay, this is what this is going to be,
Yeah.
And you just kind of feel out the dynamics of the room and so forth. And, and just just try, like I said, and then just try to get into it, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're totally self-taught, yes?
Yeah, for the most part. Like I said, my brother, he's a bass player, so he's playing before me. So I definitely learned a lot from him, actually. But yeah, you know, he wasn't trained. I did later go to, when my dad realized I was really serious about playing, he's like, well, you should go to school and learn how to read and so forth. So
good.
I did go to the Chicago Music Conservatory, and I studied privately with this great instructor, Tom Baranek, for a while. And what was interesting, he had me playing one of those old, you know, those Ampeg electrics with the scroll headstock. You know, Rick Danko from the band plays those a lot. They're actually really cool basses. But at like 10, 11 years old, that thing was so hard to play, you know. But he had me playing that, and he had me playing classical music on that. So that's what he was teaching me.
Okay.
And then a few years after that, a high school for the arts opened up in Chicago. So I went there, and that's also where I really kind of started getting more into guitar by that point. So I had some guitar teachers that weren't really, it was a new school at that particular, like it's still going now, which is great. But at the time, it was a total experiment, and no one really knew what they were doing. I mean, it was crazy. It was probably the best time to be there, because almost in a way, it was a free for all. But it was, but I did get so much out of that experience at the same time, just because I got to be around people that were listening to things that I wasn't listening to. And, you know, I mean, I was the only Black guitar player in class.
How is that possible in Chicago?
You know, well, also it was a private school as well. So, you know, maybe that's part of it, but it wasn't public school. But anyway, yeah. And also, and it was very small. I mean, the first year, I mean, it was 200 students. I mean, it was really small.
Yeah.
So it wasn't that many people. And like I said, it was a very new thing. So, you know, but in guitar class, none of them knew the stuff I was playing. You know, none of them knew we're going to play Funkadelic songs, or Sly Stone, or any of the things I had grown up on to that point. And they were like all into Rush and the Police and these things, you know. So I had to start learning that stuff if I wanted to be able to play with people. Sure. You know, so it was great in that regards. And I did have a teacher there who taught music theory and comparative arts. And I still actually speak to him every now and then. I haven't talked to him in a little while now, but he was really great. You know, he would bring in things like, you know, when he would teach us about song form and classical music, he would bring in a classical piece and then bring in like a Rush piece or something to teach us about form and how, you know, and show us how to relate these things, you know, how, you know what I mean? So he was really great that way. And he really validated a lot of things in my playing and things that I was exploring. You know, like I would bring records, like, here, check out this Eddie Hazel record, you know, and he'd take it home and listen to it, come back with a whole report,
that's great,
what he thought about it and things like that. So he was a great person to talk to about music and things like that in that way, you know.
So he's like a musical friend, not just a teacher.
Right, exactly.
That's very cool, man.
Yeah.
I know you've been to a lot of shows that have influenced you. Give me your top 2 or 3 shows you've seen.
I mean, well, I guess the first one that always comes to mind to me is Prince in 1980 on the Dirty Mind tour. Was definitely a game changer for me after seeing P-Funk for so long at that point. It was definitely like, okay, this is a new thing.
Right.
Even down to the pre-show music. I don't even know what he was playing. I don't know if it was his own music. It was stuff that in my memory, I can't go back and go, oh, that was this band or this band. I think it was just demos he'd been working on that were just these weird kind of punky, new wavy kind of things that were playing before he came on, you know? So even down to that, it was just such a different vibe, you know? And
what tour was that?
That was the Dirty Mind tour.
Dirty Mind tour.
And the single off that record was Uptown. And this show was at the Uptown Theater in Chicago, you know? But that show was that was incredible. It was it was like, this is a new thing here. And then before that, I would say seeing Funkadelic at the Shrine Auditorium in LA in 75 or 76. It was before
Wow.
the mothership. It was before the mothership. So they were just really playing, you know.
That's really cool, man.
And that was great.
You were really young then.
I was 9 or 10 years old. Yeah.
Wow.
And I went to that show after them hanging out at our apartment a lot. And, you know, so it was great to actually go to gig and see them on stage in that mode, you know, it's just like, wow. Okay.
Isn't it funny when you meet somebody, like if I saw you play, it's a different context than here. Right.
Right.
And for me, when I see that, it's always like so cool. It's totally different. Like it's nothing like I hear people playing or singing. I'm like, wow.
Right.
It's so did you have any of that? Like, so you kind of like hung out with these guys. Now you're seeing them playing. Was it like, oh my God.
I'll tell you, which this also would be one of those great experiences, but this is the greatest example of that was, I saw Jeff Buckley play in Chicago in 94 at this cafe called Uncommon Grounds. And it was the first time he was playing in Chicago ever. And I knew Jeff in LA before he moved to New York and became the Jeff Buckley that we all know. Carla Azar, the drummer from Wendy and Lisa, who's also great inspiration to me musically and was one of my favorite musicians. She was friends with Jeff, so she introduced me to him. So the three of us used to hang out all the time and goof off and there's a cafe we used to go to in Toluca Lake in LA and hang out, just be goofballs and listen to music and all that stuff. And we always talked about, well, we should put a band together, but never get it together. But, and Jeff at the time, he never talked about singing. All I knew is that he was a guitar player, and he actually went to GIT. So he was a total fusion shredder. Like he could do all that stuff.
I did not know that.
Yeah. He's a full on shredder. And
I did not know that at all.
So, but anyway, I remember he got to the point, I did remember he started exploring his voice before he left LA, and I started hearing about it. We weren't hanging out so much, but I would hear through Carla, for instance, that he was like studying like all the blues, got like Son House and Skip James, and I always knew he loved Robert Plant and all that stuff, but he was learning how to sing the stuff. Like he was really starting to get into that. And so he got to a point in LA where he just felt like he needed to be somewhere else to really develop his thing, so he moved to New York. So there was a period where I didn't see him very long. And so in 94, I was living in LA at the time, but I had to go to Chicago to make a record with Chris Connelly. And I went there a little bit early just so I could hang out with people and stuff. And I looked in the paper and it said, oh, Jeff, at the Reader. And it says Jeff Buckley's playing at Uncommon Grounds. Like, really? Okay. What is this? So I'm like, I'm going to go and freak him out because we haven't seen each other in I don't know how long.
Right.
And I walk into the place and it was totally packed. I mean, Grace wasn't out yet. I'm not even sure if Live at Chennai was out. That might have just come out. But another friend of mine was working for Sony at the time, and she really did her job promoting this gig. And so I get there and it's totally packed. And I couldn't find anywhere to sit. And so this friend of mine, Sally, gets a milk crate and literally sits it underneath the mic stand. Right. So I'm going to be sitting right in front of him. Right. Yeah. So I'm trying to get his attention because I want him to know I'm here and I'm going to be sitting right here, And I see him in the back and he's doing that thing where first of all, he's not expecting to see me. So that's the other thing. So he's looking everywhere but at me, and I'm trying to get his attention and he's just not paying attention to me. So I'm like, okay, whatever. So he comes out and he's tuning his guitar, and naturally you're like looking down, maybe he had to tune on the ground or something. And I was just for the longest was staring at him, waiting for him to, and then he finally caught my eyes. He's like, Chris, and I'm like, yeah. And he's like, what the fuck are you doing here? And he grabs my face, gives me this big kiss on the lips. It's hilarious. And he's just totally freaked out on there. And I'm like, well, you know, so I'm like,
that's really cool, man.
So then he starts his set, and the first thing he plays is the song Grace. And I was like, I couldn't believe it.
Because you didn't know him in that context.
I did not know where he had gotten to. I had no idea. I will say he had sent me a demo he had done previous to that of a few things where he had started singing. And it was interesting because some of the songs were, like, me and him we used to love Ministry and Metallica and all this kind of stuff. So some of the stuff, and I know he liked Soundgarden a lot. He loved Chris Cornell. So the tunes he was writing at that particular time were almost kind of like grunge metal kind of vibe. Wow,
that's interesting.
Yeah. Except there was one song, which was The Last Goodbye, which is on Grace.
Yeah.
Was in there. And that song, I feel, is really influenced by the Smiths, because I know he loved that stuff too. Like, we bonded on the Smiths and Cocteau Twins. Like,
great band.
Yeah. Yes, he listened to everything. And so to me, that was reflective of that influence. So those demos, that was the one song that I would tie more. It was on Grace, actually. That song ended up there, but the metal things, none of that stuff ever came out.
Yeah.
But none of that stuff gave a hint to me to what he was singing like at this point. And when I was so blown away. It was just that, like, okay, I know you, but I don't know this person.
Yeah, right.
It was really mind blowing. I mean,
that's a nice experience to share, the two of you together. Yeah.
Yeah. And I've said this before, to me, that's the one show I can recall that I could say that I can imagine that must have been what it must have been like to see Hendrix for the first time or something. It was that mind blowing to me. You know, I just couldn't believe what he was doing. Yeah. So
that's a great story, man. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Let's talk about gear just for a few minutes. What's your go-to guitar right now? Has that changed over the years? And what other few guitars are around now? Give me 1 second. I'm turning off the fan overhead.
Yeah.
It's actually chilly in here. Words that I do not say very much in Florida.
Okay. That's fine. Yeah, as far as guitars, I mean, it took me a long time to kind of figure out what I liked in a guitar. Funny enough, I recently got back my first guitar, which is
that's awesome.
It's a Gibson. It's this weird, rare model called a KZ2. And
tell me about that.
I guess the KZ is short for Kalamazoo. But do you remember a Gibson, the Paul? Remember that dark mahogany wood? They called it the Paul. It's not a Les Paul, but it's like this dark mahogany wood. So the KZ2 is kind of like the Paul, except it's a double cutaway.
Okay, so it's like an old Les Paul.
Yeah, real thin. It's really light, but it's got a really chunky neck. But anyway, that's the guitar that I grew up playing, and I started doing like these sessions I talk about. That's what I used on all these early sessions in the 80s and all this stuff. That guitar I brought with me for the Wendy and Lisa audition in 89. I got the gig. Wendy was really into tellies because that's what she played with Prince, you know, and he always had that Hohner telly that he played. But she wanted me to play telly also. So I remember we went to Guitar Center and she bought 4 Telecasters, 2 for me, 2 for her.
Nice to have those. That's your, do you know, that was like a blessing and a curse having that as your first gig.
Right.
Yeah. You think, wow, the music business is great. Then you're in a van hauling your own shit. You're like, what?
I got it made. Yeah.
I got demoted, man.
Yeah. So I stopped playing my Gibson at that time, and my friend Carla Azar I was talking about, she was learning how to play guitar, so I let her hang on to it. I was like, well, here, why don't you hang on to it so you have something to play? Because I was playing these tellies all the time. So she just had it, you know. So anyway, my dad bought that guitar for me. And so after he passed,
that's nice, man.
I decided I wanted to get it back. And I called her up and asked her, you know, I knew she still had it. She's like, yeah, I have it. It's in storage or whatever. And so she brought it back to me, and it was still in great shape. The only thing was the front pickup. The neck pickup had died for whatever reason. And a friend of mine in LA at Old Style Guitars knew of someone in Ohio that was like a wizard at restoring old pickups. Like he
didn't put a new one on there. You restored the old one.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I guess this guy actually goes, like, he taps all the poles. Like, he actually goes through and finds specifically what's wrong with it instead of immediately rewinding it and blah, blah, blah. You know, so he's fixing send it back, and that guitar is awesome. So I'm getting
Very
to know
cool.
that guitar. Prior to that, I had a 76 Tele Custom that I played for many, many years, which is an incredible guitar. But I also didn't want to keep bringing that one on the road, so I'd been looking for something else to replace it. So I tried a few things that wasn't happening, and then I, by chance, picked up an Airline twin tone guitar at this guitar shop in LA, and I loved it. And it's, the guitar is like $400, $500 guitar, and I bought it, and that guitar is great, and I love that guitar. So, so I've mostly been playing that one,
the Airline twin tone. What does that look like?
It's a Supro reissue, actually.
Okay.
Like David Bowie was playing one of those on his last tour. It's white with the black pickguard and single cutaway, Bigsby. Really cool guitar. So that's what I take that on the road with me all the time. So those three guitars and the Gibson, I've been playing a lot on sessions again, and it's like a whole new guitar to me, because it's so funny when you don't play some. I mean, I didn't play that guitar for over 20 years probably. It doesn't sound at all like I thought it did in my memory. It doesn't feel the same. Like, the neck is way chunkier than I remembered it, especially considering I was a kid playing that
right
guitar.
Yeah, that's tough to play those big necks.
Yeah. And I play with much heavier gauge strings these days too, so I restrung with those. So it's like finding a new instrument, but it's great. It's got great low end, but it's kind of a dark sound, so the high end is really nice, and it's a really cool guitar. It's funny. Yeah.
What string gauge are you playing? It's a joke on this show, because I always say we don't talk about string. We don't talk. But since you mentioned it, what gauges are you playing with?
I think they're like 56 to 11s.
Oh, those are big. Yeah. Those are real big. Wow.
Yeah. I mean, and it's also, one, I like the way they feel. And also, I guess maybe being a bass player too. But
boom. Okay, now I get it. That totally makes sense.
And also with the tuning thing, I do so many because there's a lot. Sometimes I'll go down to C or whatever, So
it's tough to do those with light strings, man. Right. Yeah, I totally get it.
Yeah,
I'm shocked, as much of an R&B and funk guy as you are, that you didn't have like a Strat.
That's my lot.
Right? Yeah, I thought for sure you're going to say, well, I have a 62 custom or something like that.
Me and Strats have never really gotten along. There's only a friend of mine in LA, Pete Min. He's a great engineer. And he's got a great collection of guitars. He has a Strat that I love. That's the only Strat I ever picked up. Like, I really love this guitar.
Right.
And I've owned a couple over the years, and I just end up cutting them loose because they just don't click.
Really?
Yeah. And also, and again, like you mentioned, funk. To me, I feel like I'm coming at it from a different angle anyway, because to me, it's really, at least the funk that I like and I grew up on, rock and roll is a big element of it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So it's not about that super clean thing that I think people associate with, what they call funk a lot more, like that clean thing. Like, that's not what it's about to me. Like I said, like Freddie Stone from Sly and the Family Stone, he's one of my favorite guitar players. His tone is like dark, kind of thick sounding, especially when you see the live clips,
Okay.
Or it's like that super, like I said, Thank You for Letting Me almost sounds like the Stones if they were super funky. It's like that, but it's more like rock and roll guitar, and obviously Funkadelic. Eddie Hazel, who also one of the greatest rhythm guitar players of all time. Again, his tone was like dirty and just like, it's a whole different.
He played a Strat though, didn't he?
He did, but he's also, to me, there's a few people that handle a Strat to me, like obviously Hendrix, Doyle makes the Strat sound great.
Yeah.
there's only a few people I know that can make them sound like that. That can have all that body to them and beautiful high tone. I just don't know that many people that can make it happen with that instrument. It usually ends up more this tinny, high-endy thing that doesn't speak for me. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's finding the magic guitar or combining with the right. You know, I don't know what that is. And you know, a lot of times things are just in the hands. You know, Eddie also he also played a 335 quite a bit.
Yeah.
And he also got into Les Pauls. Yeah.
Man, that guy could pick up a toy and probably.
One of the few times I saw him, he was playing a Kramer at this session through a Rockman. The Rockman was hanging at the edge of the mixing console at the time, and he was plugged into, and it's like, yep, that's Eddie Hazel.
Yeah, man. Yeah, he's so good.
Yeah.
Any first album that you ever bought? Do you remember that?
I would say it was Stand by Sly and the Family Stone.
Yeah.
I'd already knew the record because my mom had it, you know, when it came out in real time.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember, I was living with my grandmother at the time, and a friend of hers, I had saved up some cash, some coins or whatever, and this friend of my grandmother's took me to the record shop. And I bought Stand again. So I remember going into that store. There used to be these great little local record stores you could go to back in the day.
I know, man. I lived in them in New York City, downtown, in the village. Exactly. I mean, I'd spend I'd go down there about 10 o'clock in the morning. I'd shop all day, 6, 7, 8 o'clock at night. And you go down there with $25-$30. You come home with 15 records. You know, it would be amazing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Give me your top 3 Desert Island discs, no particular order, and just for this minute.
I'd say There's a Riot Going On, Sly, Maggot Brain, and Billie Holiday is also someone I can listen to any given time. So any Billie Holiday compilation will do me.
Did you see her live?
No. She was gone before I came to the world. Yeah.
Chris, tell me the most important things you've learned about yourself.
I saw this question. I wrote something down.
This is why people say this is the section. People always say, "Oh, these are some tough questions." And then I always joke, "Well, I could ask you about your string gauge." So that's why I never ask about string gauge.
Yeah, right.
It's like the first time, I think.
What is it? Oh, okay. I've learned that I have great endurance.
Yeah, right on.
And as I said earlier, I feel like I have a calming energy, which I feel is valuable to the situations I come into. And also I think I'm adaptable.
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
You moved to New York recently. How you liking it?
It's great. Yeah, I just moved here a year ago, November. Yeah.
What's your favorite New York food?
There's a place. Why am I spacing on the name up? And it's a Moroccan Mediterranean spot. That's awesome. Why am I spacing on the name of this place? Shame on me. It'll come to me, and I'll get back to you on that.
Yeah.
But and also I actually like to cook a lot.
Oh, right.
So when I'm not on the road and I'm home, you know, pretty consistently, I like to get into cooking and just cooking at home, you know.
Number one hobby for musicians, cooking.
Right.
Yeah, it is. It is. Man, there used to be this really cool Mediterranean place down in the East Village called the Yaffa Cafe, Yaffa. Closed about 1.5 years ago. Oh, okay. That was so cool, man. They had an outdoor, one of those places like typically in New York, you go to the bathroom, man, you can't be a fat person. You're like, you can't move in there. Really tiny, but great place, man. One of the casualties of the rent stuff.
Right.
Best childhood memory.
That's another good one.
Yeah, you had such a robust musical childhood.
Yeah, I guess. One thing I really loved. I used to love to sit and watch my father work. I used to love to watch him paint. Because he was an illustrator during my whole life,
Sure.
That he was around. And I used to just love to just sit there and watch. I mean, I'd just be totally quiet. He always find some really great music. My dad loved a lot of jazz. He used to love to listen to a lot of soundtracks as well. And he just put stuff on and just get into it. But I just think watching him do that, taught me a lot about discipline and focus,
Yeah.
And also he just had such great passion for what he was doing as well.
That had to be really calming as a youth.
Mm-hmm.
I would imagine that was and I would also bet there was a lot of vibe going on with your dad.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
Yeah. That seemed very cool.
He was super cool and super handsome. He definitely had his swag, and also his angle of work in a way kind of, it's kind of parallel to what I do in a way, because, particularly in the later on in life, he was just he was painting for himself.
Sure.
But before it was, his jobs that he was hired to do, and so, it's interesting when you're hired to do something but you're still trying to have a voice within that. So I think watching him do that taught me a lot about how to apply that when I'm doing sessions, working with different artists and different projects,
Yeah, for sure, man.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely. What kind of stuff did he illustrate? Was it like,
he did things he would do, he did a lot of educational book covers and, a lot of advertisement stuff, fashion stuff back in the day.
So he was like you, man. He was like a jack of all trades when it came to painting.
He started out, he was a courtroom artist for a while for CBS.
Holy smokes.
In Chicago. And then he was art director for CBS in Chicago for a long time. And then he actually started a company called Graphica, which was a collaboration with other Black artists and photographers. And they did a lot of posters that had a lot of text. Like, at the time, the work was, kind of psychedelic a little bit too.
Yeah.
And so then when they have these slogans on them, and a couple of his posters, like there's one in particular called, it says, "Check Out Your Mind," which was a Curtis song. That poster hangs on the wall in one of the scenes of Superfly.
Really?
Yeah.
That is so cool.
Another one of those posters hangs on the wall, and Cleopatra Jones and
Cleopatra Jones. Yeah. Those movies, those like blaxploitation movies, man. Some of them are pretty funny like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm going to look, I bet you I can find, I'm going to look that poster up. Check Out Your Mind. I'm sure I can find it online in Google.
Yeah. I'll send you a picture too.
Yeah. That would be great.
Yeah. But yeah, so he was doing all kinds of stuff. He did stuff for the Air Force, and there was all kinds of things he would get. He did a really intense series, this Black History series. There were all these calendars, and I don't even know where he had time to do this work. Unfortunately, I don't have the originals, but I found all the catalogs for him, and it's an endless number of pieces, and there were these montages. It would be like, it could be Malcolm X, but it's a montage, and they'll have a scene of him speaking at one place and another scene of him driving, all in one piece. Yeah. And he did hundreds of these. I don't know when he did those.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. It's really cool, man. You have that legacy now to go through every once in a while.
Yeah.
What's the most important thing he taught you?
Like I said, he really taught me about discipline and focus. And also, I also say he was really key in giving me a sense of spirituality. He definitely talked a lot about that. And also just, just the way your perception, the way you think about things affects what you do and what happens around you. Can have a big impact on that.
100%.
Yeah.
How about your mom? Most important thing she taught you, or things?
Well, she's kind of like on the other side from him, in that she was definitely an adventurous person and was like very willing to take risk, and so the things that I did do that would confound my father. Like, I'm moving to LA, I have nothing in my pocket. I'm just going, and
Yeah.
I got that from her. And also because, like I said, she moved to LA and then started having me going back and forth. So I got conditioned to traveling, and just being thrown into new situations.
Yeah.
My life with her, and she was also the main person that really encouraged me creatively from when I was really small. I started drawing when I was like 3 years old or something like that, so.
That's wonderful, man.
She got me into music even back then, and, so she really encouraged that, where my dad helped facilitate it down the road, Mm-hmm.
Outside of cooking, any other hobbies or interests outside of music?
Well, like I said, art is something that I keep saying to myself I want to get back into.
Dude, I'm smelling you need a record and you need to do your own cover, man. Yeah. Illustrated. Yeah. I'm serious, man. Yeah. That's what I'm feeling here.
Yeah. But right now, I love, like I said, cooking's been like the thing I've been enjoying doing the most.
Do you like, what do you cook well?
When I'm not vegetarian, but when I'm home, I cook vegetarian. So I'm always exploring different things with that, and I love to bake. That's always been I have a reputation even in LA for cookies. I bring cookies to sessions a lot.
That's cool. Yeah. Hey, that's a great way to get ingratiated with people, man. Hey, have some great cookies, man. That's awesome.
Jay Belrose and his partner Jennifer, for a while they would have these parties New Year's Day, and everyone would just come over, all the musicians that we all play together. We'd all come and hang out for the day, and I would bring cookies there, and for the first one or two, Jay used to hide the cookies. And then later on I'd see him divvying them out to people like in the corner somewhere.
That's so funny, like loose joints, man, or something like that. That's so funny. Oh man.
He's another person that loves to cook. Meshell loves to cook as well. Yeah, so that's definitely a musician thing.
Yeah, I'm telling you, it's the number one hobby for musicians.
Yeah.
2 more questions, man. Tell me a toughest decision you had to make or most difficult thing you had to do, Chris.
Yes. Let me see. Did I write something for that?
No, all good. Do your thing. I can't believe you haven't mentioned New York City pizza.
New York City pizza is awesome. I guess the only reason why I haven't mentioned is because I just don't eat pizza that very much anymore.
Oh, in general. Okay.
Like getting older, it's just like, okay, it might not be, but I can get down on it. If I go there, I will go there.
Dude, it's funny. We usually come up to the city, my wife and I, like, I don't know, every year, every other year. And I think, honestly, for like the 3 or 4 days we're there, I may not eat anything else but pizza and alcohol. Right. And I eat so clean and I work out all the time, but I can't resist the pizza, man.
Right. It's the toughest decision. Yeah, that's a hard question because I didn't even mark anything on here. Like, you mean like just related to music or
life in general?
Just yeah, that's a hard question. I went through a divorce, and that was
that's hard, tough, man.
And that also happened right in the middle of both my parents.
Oh man,
so that was,
yeah, that was when it rains, it pours situation. Oh man, I'm sorry. That's heavy duty, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's tough.
And I guess in one way, a tough decision was also when I decided to. Even though things did work out, but I did move back to Los Angeles reluctantly in 98 or 99. And I landed in LA for 20 years after that, though. But I remember when I went, it wasn't something I wanted to do, but I had to because I needed to make a living. And in Chicago, I just wasn't tied into the scene there. It was more like an indie scene that was thriving there. But, none of those guys that were doing that were really making a living doing that. You'd see guys from Taurus and they're great musicians and they have this band, but then they're working at the bar and, doing this stuff. And I'm like, trying to, make a living here. And also, I was responsible financially, I was helping my mom out a lot and my dad and stuff. So I couldn't just work in a bar and do what I needed to do at that time. So, but so I kind of got stuck at Chicago at that point. I'd had a publishing deal that had dried up, which was a deal I really shouldn't have had anyway, because I'm just not that kind of a writer.
Sure.
That's a whole nother story. But anyway, it had come to an end, and being in Chicago, I started missing work. Like, I remember I got caught, because that was also when things were shifting into business where, like, before that, if people wanted to hire me, they're like, okay, cool. But they'd get me a plane ticket and fly me out to do a session.
Right.
But that started changing around this time. And so I remember I got called to play on Macy Gray's first record. And it's like, well, if you were here, it'd be great to have you. But they were not going to fly me in to do that. And
so you were missing work.
So there were a couple of situations that had come up like that. And so I was like, okay, I got to get back there and get back in the pool there. Yeah. So I remember I was definitely, because I really liked my life in Chicago at that time. But yeah, I just wasn't gonna be able to keep doing what I needed to do to help my family and stuff by staying there. So I had to go back to LA. Yeah.
It's interesting, life is not easy for anybody, man. There's always ups, downs, highs, lows, and decisions you got to make that change things, man, all the time. Very few people are like unscathed, but that's just it, man. Yeah. And the last question, Chris, what's been the biggest change in your personality over the last 10 years? And how much of that change has been intentional and how much is a natural part of aging?
I think just the ability to accept life for what it is, and just growing stronger from that, and just not being hung up on like just these ideas of outcome all the time. I feel like that's something that is getting stronger in my thought process, I guess, these days.
Man, that is so. I have become like that over the last few years. And a guy said something to me, and it made so much sense. Mm-hmm. He said, "I'm not part of the results committee anymore." And I was like, "Hallelujah, man!" And for me, when I started shifting to that, it took a lot of pressure off.
Right. Yeah.
Because you're just like, I'm going to do what I got to do. If things probably will work, but if they don't, I'm good with it. It's time for the next adventure. Yeah. It just, for me, it took a lot of pressure off not being attached to the results. Just an incredible amount of pressure. Right. I found it very freeing. Man, let me tell people some of the stuff you got going on. First of all, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart, man. I really appreciate it. Your time. It was really a pleasure getting to know you. Thanks for being so open and cool. You're an extremely talented guy. I wish you nothing but continued success, man. And I really enjoyed talking with you. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Craig. I appreciate that.
Let me tell people what you got going on. First of all, I would love everybody to check out a project that Chris has got going on with his fiance, Morley. It's called Borderless Lullabies. And I'm going to let Chris tell you about it in a minute, but it's on Bandcamp. So if you just enter the words Borderless Lullabies into Google or Borderless Lullabies Bandcamp, it'll come up. It's a very cool project for a very good cause. And Chris, why don't you talk about it?
Yeah, it's a project that my fiance Morley came up with this concept because she really wanted to do something to help with this catastrophe that's going on at the borders with these children that have been taken away from their parents. And she found out some information a while ago, last summer, before that story started going a little bit mainstream. And she just wanted to do something. And she's like, let's get some of our friends and, let's write some songs. And she came up with the concept of lullabies and put them on Bandcamp, And so she just started talking to some people about it and got a few people on board. Esperanza Spalding was the first person to jump on board with it, like want to give something, and then a good friend of hers, Maria Popova, is a really great writer. She jumped on board with it, and she found someone to do a great artist, Chantel Martin, who's a British artist, got her to do the artwork, and she's friends with Yo-Yo Ma and got him involved, and then Morley's friends with people as well, got Roseanne Cash got involved, and so anyway, all these great artists contributed things, and Morley has a couple of songs on there as well, which I played on, and Liz Wright contributed to it as well. There's just a number of really great artists that gave their time to this effort, and all the money goes to KIND, which is Kids in Need of Defense, and that goes to help all the lawyers that are working pro bono to help get these kids out of this situation that they're trapped in.
That's awesome, man. And just so everybody knows, the money doesn't go to pay lawyers. The lawyers are all working pro bono, but there's expenses, obviously, with filing motions and getting this done, and having someone's got to go to the courthouse and drop shit off. So it's a good cause. All these people donated their time for free, 100%. There's some big stars on there as well. Yeah,
and the project has already raised over $22,000.
That's fantastic, man. So please, everybody, go to Borderless Lullabies on Bandcamp, and if you're behind it, please support this project. It's going for a good cause, and it's some good people put together. Also, Chris is very involved in the project that he talked about with Meshell Ndegeocello on the James Baldwin homage to James Baldwin project. When is that coming out?
It'll be out sometime this year. I hope we'll get it out probably by the summer. I think that's the plan. Yeah.
Fantastic. That's awesome. And Chris is also involved. He is producing a new record for Liz Wright. Want to talk about that?
Yeah. We're in still development stage. We recorded some things earlier this year. We're still writing, and we're taking our time, but I would hope to get that record out by the fall. Yeah.
Awesome. So you're writing, producing, and playing on it, I'm assuming.
Yeah, producing, playing, and doing some co-writing on it. Yeah,
that's awesome, man. And if you want to get involved with Chris or talk to Chris about doing some co-writing, producing, or hiring him to play on your record or to do tracks or to just give you guidance, the best thing to do is to find him on Instagram. Do you have is it just Chris Bruce, or is it normal?
It's C Bruce, so that's CEEBREW.
Cool. Right, it's C Bruce, CEEBREW. It's Chris Bruce, and reach out to him on Instagram. Please do me a favor, just give him some background information. Don't just say, hey man, I want to hire you. Talk to him like you talk to every other business professional. What are you interested in? What do you think he could bring to the table? This way he can have a good frame of reference to answer you back, and so you're not wasting his time or yours. So please do that. And anything else I missed, man? I'm like your newest fan, man. So what else can I promote for you, man?
Well, also I should mention I produced the latest Paula Cole record as well.
Right on. And what is that called?
Revolution.
Dude, I want to interview in 3 years or 5 years, because you're going to have this, you're going to be this big time producer, I think. And seriously, I'm not just saying that. I don't say this to anybody. I think you've got such good experience, and you're obviously, you're producing records. You're not producing records for some band that just was got their first gig. You're doing major production here, man. So I'm expecting more of that from you. Yeah. So we will reconvene in a few years, man, to have a part 2 of this, my brother.
All right, cool.
Let me wrap this up. Hang on one second, Chris. Everybody, and thank you, man. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you. Yeah.
Everybody, thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this, please share it on your social media channels. We appreciate your support. Thanks very much to Chris Bruce for spending time with us. Please support the projects he's involved with. Go to Borderless Lullabies. Look that up on Bandcamp. All the money goes, 100% of the funds proceeds go to support the cause behind it. Hit him up on Instagram at cbrew or Chris Bruce, and also the record for Liz Wright and Paula Cole, right? And Meshell Ndegeocello has the James Baldwin project coming out real soon. And most important, don't forget, remember that happiness is a choice, so choose wisely. Be nice, go play your guitar, and have fun. Till next time, peace and love, or your bass. Peace and love, everybody. I'm out.
Cool.